growing weary of running from room to room, practicing one-tooth insurance-driven dentistry? Then stay tuned for the latest episode of The Lionhearted, where Dr. Stephen Rasner will hand you the blueprint for what many call the gold standard of general practice dentistry.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Steve Rasner, and you're listening to the Lionhearted Dentist Podcast. I have what I think is a treat for you this week. I'm actually going to do a mini version of a presentation that I gave in 2013. Now, why on earth would I do that? Well, the name of that presentation was called Your Blueprint for a Fast and Furious Recovery. And so think about it. For the last 2 weeks, I've been talking about the preparation required by you, this preparation that I'm doing right now, to align my office for a positive 2021 for next year. And it's something I've done for years and years. And we've talked about different elements and parameters of that preparation in the last two podcasts. But the reason this one shouts to me is because I know a lot of you listening can't even relate to 2013. Some of you didn't have your degrees yet. Some of you might have been in, high school. I guess that's not true. That would be 7 years ago. Whatever, it was a long time ago. So let me remind you. In 2008, you can Google this to back up and fact check me. There was a recession known as the Great Recession in the United States and in Europe. And its effects lingered for 6 years. It didn't just get over. I mean, it was officially over about 18 months after it started from 2008. But the tentacles of the negative effect of that recession went on and on. And on top of it, for me personally, I had back surgery in 2011. And so for the first time in my career, I missed significant time. I missed 3 months of work. And that presentation was how I came back from that. And I'm going to tell you something. We're all in this one together. And globally, obviously, we all are enduring the negative impact of a global pandemic. And some of us have individual stories that only you know about, just like I did in 2011 with my back, which just adds to the obstacle that you're trying to achieve. But my approach was the same approach I've used pretty much for any setback during my career. So I want you to hear it. I think it's right up our alley. So let me get on to it. You know, there's a lot of different approaches to how to turn things around in your life or how to overcome obstacles. There was a popular book in the early 2000s called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And that book would tell you about repeating to yourself that life isn't always an emergency. Surrender to the fact that life's not always fair. Mistakes are not really that big of a deal. And that is probably really good advice if you're not a dentist. Because think about what I'm about to say and how that is so relevant if you're trying to get away from toxic insurance plans that are way worse in 2020 than they were in 2013. Do you think it doesn't matter if a patient, I want you to really think about this, sits unnoticed in your reception room? I got to tell you something as I'm going through this. So my particular office is set up that it's like in a circle. So it's very common for me to lap the office during the day just by the things I'm doing. If I go to the break room, to come out of the break room and then go back into my private office for a few seconds, I come through the reception area. And look, I've been at this a long time. I got to tell you something. If I can read with my eyes, and I know some of you can too, the body language, or at least I think I can, in a matter of seconds of a patient sitting in my reception room. As I'm walking through it just to get from one space to the next, I have peripheral vision that can see these things. And even if it's not true, I'm noticing it. And if there's a patient sitting there, I guarantee you that multiple times a week, as I get and close that door, I'll say, who's in the chair at 2:00 behind me? Are they taken care of? Have they been registered? And granted, we're in a pandemic, and just by design, there's less patients sitting in that room these days. But it's gotten a little more relaxed since we came back in May of this year. And there's often, I have a pretty large size reception room. There can be 3, even 4 people in there, well beyond 6 feet apart. Do you think it doesn't matter if when they call your office, they can't get a live voice to speak to? This was my presentation in 2013. If you, the doctor, are constantly interrupted while you're doing treatment, that somebody from the front desk comes back and verbally says something, somebody's on the phone. I don't care if it was a doctor that you called earlier that day. You'll hear me talk about protocols, the protocol book that I wrote about 10 years ago. One of my proudest achievements, quite honestly. You know where it came from? In the very early years of my speaking in 1998, I thought I was more than I was. I'm not kidding. My opening presentations that I did in my career were to really big audiences. It's a long story how that happened. But my first one was like to an audience of 2,000 people. And it was so invigorating and so motivating to me that I thought I was more than I was. So at that time in my life, even today, when I would take a break, a 3-day break somewhere or a vacation, I often stayed at the Four Seasons hotel chain, which I am just infatuated with how they run their business. And the Ritz-Carlton as well. And it wasn't the glitter and even just the physical beauty of most of their properties. It was how the people treated other people. So I went to the Four Seasons. I told them that I'm a speaker. And I admired the way they ran their property. And I guess at that time, the excitement within me just bubbled out. And I said, I would love to share with my audiences, how do you do what you do? So they gave me this little tag or this card that I could show at any Four Seasons resort property. And I could interview anybody that I wanted to, as long as they had a few moments and they weren't engaged with something that that particular hotel had them assigned to. And I did. I did it for a couple of years, from bartenders to managers. I remember vividly doing this to all the workers, from the guy in the hallway that's cleaning the windows, to the person that delivered food to the room, to the people down in the gym. It just went on and on and on. It was amazing. And one of the things I came away with from doing that was that they are founded on what they call protocols. Protocol is the way you do something. And I just thought that was a great idea. So I came back to my office over that period of time, and I said, we're going to have a protocol book like the Four Seasons does. I said to myself, I'll give myself a year. And every time something happens that I don't know the answer to, that I think should have had a better answer, I'm going to write it down on the spot. That's really hard to do if you're a full-time clinician, not a manager, but a clinician. And it's easy to say that to you, but it's really hard for a year to break what you're doing and write it down, then take it home, define it, think about it, and give the answer to what you think the answer should be. And then put it in a book and have the whole team sign it so everybody knows what we stand for. That is, truthfully, how that book that I later turned into a book to sell, that is on my website, by the way, became born. Listen, you know by now that I'm way past the point of pushing products. When I used to lecture early in my career, up to a few years ago, I would have my products in the back of the room. Tapes I've made, The Art of the Close, The Art of Getting Paid, The Extraordinary Bulletproof Guide for Success, and the Protocol book, and even live lectures I did. But those days have kind of gone by, and all these books and tapes in this big room in my office at this time. But I'm telling you that because one of the protocols was that interrupting treatment protocol, that you can never come back into an operatory if the doctor was there and verbally say anything unless it was unequivocally positive and would add to that patient's experience. That was one of the things that I took home on a weekend, thought about, brought in, and had my office sign it during those times. So think about it for a minute. And the reason it happened is because at that time in my career, I constantly found myself interrupted by different people. And it gets, maybe the third person that interrupts you with patient X in a room doesn't know that you were already interrupted 2 other times by other staff members. It just can't happen. And look, I had a slide for years that said everything counts. And I know this minutia that I'm giving you right now with interrupting your doctor may sound unbelievably trite to you. But in reality, it's one of the things that's palpable to people that get my office and get your office, that they are getting 100% of me. If your office isn't immaculate, do you think that doesn't matter? If your staff seems disinterested. So the other thing I said, as I'm giving you actually the presentation that went on that day in Massachusetts. By the way, for a good friend of mine named Tom Arendt, who used to put on lectures like that, and I would be a guest, and I gave that presentation. And I realized that the things I asked my colleagues to do are very trying at times. Isn't it just enough that you can be a good clinical dentist? And the answer is no. That is not good enough. Not today, not even a little bit close. And I remember having a slide that I'm looking at right now that said, unless you puke, faint, or die, keep going. Because in the end, it'll be worth it. So I say that to you because I know that there are times in this year right now where you don't feel like mustering the energy required to win, to keep going for what it is you hear me talk about all the time. To be the Lionhearted dental office, to be independent of insurance, all those things. And you got to. It's worth the price. I've also said in many lectures that no one's coming to rescue you. Not in my life anyway. If feeling sorry for myself helped and would solve my problems, then I would do it more. But it doesn't. And so I don't even waste my time doing that. At the end of the day, it's pretty much up to me to make the whole thing work, because it should be up to me. I have the most to gain and the most to lose. So do you. That's just the truth. So I told him that the first step in coming back is to plan your comeback. And you've heard me talk about this endlessly. I think this is so up our alley right now. Nobody knew in 2013 we were going to have a pandemic 7 years later. I was talking about coming back from a crippling financial crisis that would probably pale in comparison to what we're going through. But it worked. It absolutely worked. And back then I had a thing called, as you heard me talk about, called the monthly meeting. And I will tell you this, and during that time was the first time I moved the monthly meeting to every 2 weeks. I know that's a turnoff to many of you. The thought of you having to meet with your team and pay them during working hours just seems counterintuitive to what you should be doing right now to up your success, to up your numbers. But you have to do it that way because I've tried everything else. You can't meet on their day off. They're not going to do it. And if you schedule it at the end of the day, invariably somebody's going to run late. Maybe you'll be burned out and you'll cancel the meeting. Trust me. Ask me how I know. So the meetings were first thing in the morning, 9 o'clock. In our office, it was usually about an hour and 15-minute meeting. It was preset. We knew everybody had a written agenda in their hand that they were expected to look at. Don't allow these to turn into complaining sessions. That does not drive you forward to do such a thing. They were pre-scheduled, by the way, so nobody could ever say, I didn't know there was a meeting. That is why I started pre-scheduling them. And in the monthly meetings, which you probably should have right now, and when I say monthly, it's every 2 weeks. It's an every 2 week meeting. If you need it, if you're killing it right now and everything's going well for you, then God bless you. I would be very sure that everything is going great right now. It could be a little disillusioning for some of us with the PPP money that we received. Be very sure. I don't know how you could go wrong in doing it. And by the way, when I did these meetings, I had my entire team in the meeting. I don't know that that's absolutely positive. I probably would start that way, but I would have great vision as I looked at the people in the meeting that if somebody seemed disconnected at every meeting, which some of mine did, I just eliminated them from the meeting. There's just no point. There's no point in paying 10 people when only 6 are probably key, the heads of your department. Now, some of you have 4 people that work for you. Obviously, they're all going to have to be. The less people you have, the more department heads that you have, correct? So that monthly meeting is where you decide what insurances you're going to start to cut. You know, how you're going to up your game, pardon the expression, as a new patient experience for people coming into you for the first time out of network. That can't be so-so. You can't treat everybody. They got to feel it. They got to feel it from the second. And when I say feel it, maybe it's the cleanliness of your office. I mean everything. If there's glass doors, spotless. You can imagine what I'm like. If there are restrooms, spotless. Somebody in charge of greeting that patient, not a, oh, by the way thing. I say that to you because that has been my experience with many new offices that I go into. So, the monthly meeting is for that. You got to decide. Do you care enough about this? You don't have the right to complain how bad it is right now if you're not given the energy that's required to get you to a different place, because it does work. And then there's the morning meetings. And in the morning meetings, there's a whole litany of things you want to accomplish. The morning meeting is about 10 minutes. And it doesn't happen as soon as you get there. Your team needs to be there, in my opinion, 30 minutes before the day starts. Maybe 30 minutes before that meeting. And that would look like this. Your hygienist would be going through their charts. Ask yourself, is that happening or not? Why would they go through the charts? Well, who is due for needed radiographs? Not radiographs just so you can up your productivity. You have a patient that's got immaculate hygiene, hasn't had a restoration in 3 years. Maybe they don't need one every 2 years. So that's not even where I'm coming from. I mean as a doctor, as a good clinical provider type of office, who needs radiographs? Who had work done last year that your hygienist can point to or speak of how you do it? Don't you want to know that? Don't you want to know that before you walk in the room? Because as you know, I have these famous hygiene slips that are put in each room. I have 2 to 3 hygienists every day. So they come in whatever room I'm in 10 minutes after they seat their patient. Because during those 10 minutes, They've had these conversations. They'll know already if they're taking a new full mouth series. They'll know already about the work I did a year or two ago, how the patient is doing with it. How about 3, work that we discussed, but we put on a back burner for now? Not pressure. Listen, I wouldn't have recommended it, or neither would have you, if it wasn't warranted. And maybe not everybody, of course, accepts treatment. So, opportunity to talk about that. Opportunity to talk about, especially during the pandemic, personal things that may have occurred that you should know before you walk in a room, especially now. I mean, I walk in on patients that lost loved ones, and maybe not pandemic related, but just it's happened a lot in a big practice. I think it does happen. So my office looks like that. That's the hygienist doing that. The dental assistants are going through the charts also, because when you engage in an implant practice, which many of you are, these cases can certainly go on for months, if not longer. I mean, we're waiting in my office 4 months for implants to integrate before we load and restore them. And I can't say to you honestly, as I look at you, I'm in touch that moment every morning when I walk in at what position of the treatment plan this patient's at. So yes, I need them to go in there and review the charts. What's that patient's needs? Same thing. How they did with what we did last time. Are we clear on what we're doing today? I have a patient coming in tomorrow from another state. He's coming in from Michigan that I've worked on, and I'm in the 3rd level of his treatment. Well, he wanted to know why he needed sedation for this visit, if we're just taking impressions, because he had selective amnesia, meaning he forgot that I had to uncover his implants in this particular case. And so I'm just giving you a real life example that happened today, that patients are not always in touch. I mean, how many patients have you had that you did an impression on, or you placed an implant on, and the next time you saw them, they thought they were getting their tooth, or their denture is not complete yet, or whatever it is. Happens all the time. So yes, preparing for that meeting each day is extremely relevant to prepare for that day. The other thing that I talked about at this presentation was that my team understood the difference, as I'm sure you think is important, between lip service and meaningful patient service. Remember, I'm always aware, particularly in my practice, and if you're going to follow part of this blueprint, then you need to be aware that patients that go out and network need to feel that it's worth it. I mean, I don't think that's a hard concept to master. So having front desk team members who just placate a patient by, hey, how are you? But don't really listen to the patient. That isn't good enough, in my opinion, as they walk in. And this lip service covers a wide range of topics. I really feel that when I listen randomly at any time to my front desk team talking to a patient, they're engaged. They know way more about that patient outside the office than I do. That is a cool thing. That is a relationship-based practice that you hear me allude to all the time. And you have to work on that. Just perfunctory, how you doing, and not even really listening to how they're doing, makes you just like everybody else, in my opinion. I can assure you, and the eye contact and smiling and all the things that make people feel value, all the things, by the way, that go on in those 5-star hotels like Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, or 5-star restaurants that you've been to, that's not an accident. So lip service and meaningful patient service are 2 very different things. By the way, where do you find this kind of team? Some of you must be saying, God, I wish I did have that. It's a lifetime career-long journey to try to put it all together. I'm not kidding. Because you probably don't know this unless you've read like I have read, but there are people in the workforce, like people that turn over the rooms in a hotel. There are actually people in the workforce that take incredible pride. I know it may not seem possible to some of us in making that room turned over for the next guest the best looking, clean, inviting room that the next guest ever saw. So I would say to you that you have to look for people in your interviews that want to be recognized for unparalleled excellence in whatever they're doing. It's hard. It's so easy to just hire somebody who's had experience. Hear me out, and I'm going to leave this podcast at this and pick it up on the next one because it's too good of a, at least it feels it to me, too good of a podcast. But think for a minute, at least this is how I feel, just about the staff members at a Starbucks, right? I will just take that one for example. Do you think it's an accident that they have that thing that they have, that knack of smiling at you and being, it's different. Is it not different from your neighborhood deli or other places that we went to outside of Starbucks? I do have a book on Starbucks culture. I haven't really read it, but there's something they're teaching their people. And the same could be said certainly for Apple, the Apple Store people. And by the way, if you have an Apple Store in your community, go to it 30 minutes before it's open if you ever want to see something interesting. They're doing something that I've talked about. You'll see them all come together. They're doing a morning meeting every day. I promise you, that's what goes on in Apple. And we were doing it in my office way before Apple was ever even invented. Or nobody heard about the Apple culture. And I'm going to leave it at this. I went to a new store today I've never been to, it's called REI, I think. It's a camping store because I'm not a big camper. It's my first experience ever walking in that type of store. I was blown away by their customer service. And this is during a pandemic. I don't know what it cost them. I don't know their bottom line. I don't know anything about REI. Maybe I have the initials wrong. It's a camping franchise. They sell all kinds of clothes and camping gear and stuff like that. I didn't feel sold to, but I felt cared for and well directed. I mean, this stuff's not an accident. And it isn't even that hard for you to put this stuff in motion in your office. But it's never going to happen if you take 10 minutes in the morning and that's your idea. This is a monthly meeting thing. You got to want this, guys. You got to want this culture. Once you have it in place and you have the right people in place, it gets easier. It's not over because I find myself constantly having to remind our team why we get to do what we get to do, which is work 4 days a week, not work evenings. Be in the company of pretty cool patients and good people. It's obvious that seek out our office for their dental care. And they are paying more for that to happen because they're all going out of network unless they don't have insurance. And I'll say it to you again, it is worth it. For all the work I have to put in, for all the work they have to put in, my staff and team, to make this a tangible, palpable experience from the moment they call to the moment they come in and then when they check out. Just like when you go to an Apple store. I mean, it's, come on. 20 years ago, did somebody wear something on their hip where they can check you out of their store? Somebody researched that and knew that consumers would want that. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Remember, I did this in 2013, and I'm not done yet, so I'll continue it on the next podcast, and I hope you enjoy it. Everybody stay strong, stay healthy. Keep listening, I hope, to the Lionhearted Dentist podcast. And write to me, DRRASNER at AOL.com. Thanks for tuning in.